Hi, welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, I want to talk about the heart, the mind, and the will. And we do a lot of videos on Calvinism here, so I'm not talking about the will in the sense of Calvinism versus non-Calvinism. I'm just talking about the will in the sense of ordinary everyday usage of the will. A person's inclination and intent and earnestness to do something. So in the heart, mind, and will, I came across somebody talking about the heart, mind, and will recently, and it automatically jumped out at me as relevant to Christians and Christianity. And I think one of the problems of Christianity is that we fail to produce transformed people who are effective. And when I heard an explanation that boiled things down to heart, mind, and will, it really made a whole lot of sense to me. And of course, it brought a whole lot of passages to my mind, and it brought to mind a sermon that I once preached not long ago. I guess it was about 5 years ago now. I was asked to preach at a church, and the topic that I preached on, the passage I preached on, was love the Lord your God with all your mind. And the thing that bothers me about a lot of Christians is that for some reason, at least in the circles that I'm familiar with, mainly Baptists, Independent Baptists, Southern Baptists especially, there is this thought that because of faith or because of the willful assertion of creedal propositions, because I can establish certainty that way, or because they think certainty can be established that way, though none of them would word it that way, because of low resolution linguistics, cultural cognitive grammar. But because they can establish certainty with the willful assertion of creedal propositions, once you have been told what those propositions are and you commit to them, you no longer need to do anything with your mind so that it is a efficient or functional or effective epistemic tool. Okay? And so what I'm trying to prompt people to do in that sermon that I preached, and I don't think it's online anywhere, I just have a recording of it somewhere. But the idea, what I'm trying to get people to do is to commit your mind to the Lord, to commit your intellect and the capacity of the mind, and love the Lord with that. Not, it's not this, bear down, I'm loving the Lord with all my mind. It's not like something that you can just grunt and bear and force to happen. It's in order to, if you love me, keep my commandments kind of thing. I've heard somebody talking about the 5 love languages recently, how Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. So how would you show your love for God with your mind? It seems like you would have to commit its potentiality to God. Okay? And of course, in order to do that, you would have to identify what God is, and that sort of thing. So the mind, how do you love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength? And that's what I want to get at today. These things occur to me. So some verses pop into mind. I really just wanted to talk free, but I did jot down a few notes, and I don't want to ruin the feeling of informality that I like to have in this video. But I am going to put my notes up here where I'm talking about the heart and the will and the mind. And I think that I can actually make these a little bit bigger so that you can see them. So some verses pop into mind. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 36 through 38. Master, which is the great commandment in the law? And Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. For this is the first and great commandment. Okay, so that kind of pops into my mind when I hear this. Jesus answered him, now I'm in Mark 12, 29 through 31. We're going to add something else here. We're going to go beyond the Matthew one. He adds something else. Jesus answered him, the first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. So what gets added here that isn't captured in the Matthew version is with all thy strength. And I do think that that is where the will comes in. Okay? Your strength, your inclination to commit to getting something done. And behold, and I'm in Luke 10:25-28, and behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life? And he said unto him, What is written in the law? Now, bear in mind, this is before the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Okay? 1 Corinthians 15:17 kind of thing. That is important for us. Had not happened yet when Jesus is talking here. What is written in the law? Jesus says. How readest thou? And he answered and said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And he said unto him, Thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live. Of course, Jesus is kind of, he's given them the Proverbs 26:4-5 treatment here. And you have to understand that about Jesus. So when we break these things down into heart, mind, and will, I want to talk about the way that they could be affected. The description that I heard somebody talking about was like an activist. Imagine an activist, the kind of activist who goes and ties himself to a tree because chains themselves, handcuffs themselves to a tree because they don't want the tree to be cut down because they're trying to save the trees, that kind of thing. So if that is a good thing to do, to save the trees, if that is a good thing to do, then the person's heart and will may be in the right place. Because the heart, they want that to come to pass. The will, they're willing to go do something about it. They're going to go chain themselves to a tree. That's pretty significant action. But their mind is not in the right place because that puts a very temporary barrier on one thing, but does not actually systemically stop the bulldozing of trees. Now, I'm using this example because it was used in the example that was given. Now, personally, I know better than this. I know that the people who are cutting down trees are also fully committed to regrowing them, and that there is more greenery on Earth right now than there was before bulldozers were invented. I know this. Okay, so I'm not promoting this as a good idea. I'm just saying that this was the example that was used. So go with me on this. Okay. So if the person's mind was in the right place, they might do something better with it. Let's say a person's heart and will in the right place, they might go, do something like that. One person in one place making a ruckus, causing some inconveniences for other people, but not effectively doing anything systemic to actually solve the problem they're trying to solve. Okay, so they don't have their mind prepared to do anything. And the capacity to bring something to pass, we're calling that agency. So you are an agent in an arena, and your agency is your capacity to bring something to pass that was not so before. So if you wanted to stop the bulldozing of trees, actually bringing that to pass systemically would be what you would want to happen, but creating a temporary annoyance and delay is not a good application of the mind. So a mind is missing there. So let's say a person we'll go through each of these, and we'll say each person, say you're missing one of these things. If a person has the mind to bring something to pass and the will to bring something to pass, but not the heart to bring the right thing to pass, okay, you might have something like a psychopathic politician or a psychopathic CEO of an organization or a country that creates a lot of harmful externalities to the commons. If you have a person whose heart and mind are in the right place, but they don't have the will, they have the know-how to make something happen, and they have the heart to want the right thing to happen and to care, but they don't have the will to get up and do something about it. I think we've all seen that movie where the hero, the protagonist, goes and visits some old man in a cave somewhere who has all the answers, and then he takes all those answers from the old man in the cave and then goes and saves the world, okay? Well, why isn't the old man in the cave doing anything about it, okay? Maybe he doesn't have the ability, and that could be the case. But he has the heart and the mind, and he wants the thing to happen, but he doesn't have the will, or maybe was unsuccessful. And now that is a factor as well. So the kind of guy that secludes themselves, they could do something about it, but they have other interests. That is an issue of the will. In the Army, one of the sayings that the sergeant major used to say to some of the soldiers in my company when I was in recruiting was that if you don't do something, there's 3 reasons why. You can't. It's can't, don't, or won't. In other words, you can't do it, you don't want to do it, or you don't know how, okay? Or you or you just won't. All right? So it might be that you can't because you lack the equipment or something, or you don't know how, or you just won't because you have a will problem. You just have other interests. I'm going to commit my time to something else. What I want to advocate for in Christianity is to increase our procedural knowledge of how to transform into a person that has all 3 of these in the right place. Now, I'm saying procedural knowledge. Before I proceed and go forward, I am presuming that if you're listening to this video, you are familiar with the 4 kinds of knowing which we've covered in many of our previous videos. And if you're not familiar with that, this would probably be a good time to pause the video and go back and look at some of those videos, because I'm going to use some of that language. We're going to talk about the 4 kinds of knowing. The deepest kind is participatory knowing, and then there is perspectival knowing, and then there's procedural knowing, and then there's propositional knowing. Now, the West, even Western Christianity, is tyrannized by propositional knowing at the expense of the other 3 kinds of knowing. So what that means is in Christianity, we measure our success by how many people we can persuade to willfully assert the same propositions that we think are true. We call that a success. Meanwhile, the people who are willfully asserting these propositions, we'll say, what propositions? All the list of things, like a proposition is cats are mammals, okay? That's a proposition, like just factual statements. So the list of, when I talk about, willful assertion of creedal propositions, what I'm talking about is like the statement of faith at your church. You convince as many people as possible that those things are true, and you measure that as a success. Well, the problem is the people who agree to be persuaded, who become persuaded those things are true, at least they're willing to willfully assert them on the outside, they are not agentic in any way that is distinguished from other people in the world who aren't in the church, okay? For example, they're getting divorced at the same rate, okay? We don't have any procedural knowledge. We can put propositional knowledge in people's heads all day long. But Christianity has lost the procedural knowledge to produce transformed people that behave wisely, to produce people who walk in wisdom. I feign to speak of wisdom as something that you possess. It's something that you be, okay? It's something that a person would have to, in other words, you can't obtain honesty. You practice honesty. It's something you do. And so there's the list of qualities that together compose wisdom is something that a person practices. You practice wisdom. We are not good at producing people who practice wisdom, who walk in wisdom, people who are transformed, who walk, who can exhibit. Like if Christianity were a product on the shelf and you could see what it does to people, would you want to buy it? Now that's actually my issue with seminary. People tell me I should go to seminary and get my doctorate and all this kind of stuff. Well, I've been to Bible college, but I probably, other than 2 people that I've ever met or been aware of, I only met one of them. but probably only 2 people that I've ever been aware of in my entire life would ever make me think that maybe a seminary education might be worth some of the money. Okay? Well, we live in the day and time where just about all the propositional knowledge is available at the touch of a button anyway. Okay? So first of all, why would you pay $80,000 for something you can get anywhere you are? All you need is the syllabus, essentially. You can watch all the lectures online. You can do all the work. You can gain the knowledge that way. Now, if you want credentials and that kind of thing, that's different. But if you're just trying to gain the information, if you look at the product, the vast majority of all the people that I've ever seen who have had that kind of education, if it's a product on a shelf that I could buy, I don't want it. It's not attractive to me. It's not something that I want to have. So it's like this. As Christians, we need to figure out how to regain the procedural knowledge for how to produce transformed people, not just brainwashed, ideologically possessed people who are persuaded to willfully assert certain creedal propositions, which doesn't really practically change anything, and it also does not create any attractors that would make somebody want to have what we claim we have, which we don't practically have. What do we really have? We just have a list of, propositions to willfully assert. And once you have enough people doing that, you call it a success. You convince and persuade people of XYZ number of things being propositionally true, and you call that a success. But what is, of the people sitting in the pews in church, what's their participatory attunement with the numinous, with God? What is God? What is their perspectival understanding of God, of other people, of the things of metaphysics, of the things that we think are true, of the capacity to make sense, conduct sound epistemology on their own or in a distributed cognition framework or in decentralized collective intelligence? What is their capacity? What is their procedure? How do they know how to do that? Procedural knowledge, okay? So the individual needs to have procedural knowledge in those areas, and the church as a whole needs to have procedural knowledge of how to produce transformed individuals, which it does from being on this planet more than 40 years, I have yet to see, okay? Now, there are individuals, every once in a while you come across one, but programmatically we are not doing statistically a good job of producing this kind of thing. Could it be, and you have to ask this question, okay? Like the people who support socialism and communism, one of the errors they make, that they always think, oh, it would work if it were just done right. We just haven't had the right people in charge yet. And I got to be honest with you. I feel like we're saying the same thing in Christianity. It's like, oh, it works. We just haven't had the right people in charge yet. Haven't done it right yet. At what point do we stop and turn around and look at the paradigm itself and say, maybe there's something deeper here that I'm not getting. Maybe there's something that I need to reconsider. Either there's a flaw in the paradigm or in my understanding of it or in my execution of it. When do you stop and ask that question? Look at the fruit of what I have done. And now, some years later, what's the real benefit of that? So if Christianity is true, maybe I've got a very skewed version of it. Maybe we all have a very skewed version of it. Now, I think some of the early church stuff, and I'm not talking about the apostolic era, I'm talking about 3rd, 4th, 5th century stuff, differentiating between what is considered heresy and orthodoxy. I think Christianity as a whole started really going off the rails at that point as far as what Christianity should be about and what it should be trying to accomplish. I mean, really off the rails. Very, very big issues there. So can we go all the way back 1700 years and fix those things and try to get them back on the rails? You basically have a 40, if you had a 45-year-old kid that was failure to launch, you probably guess by then that they're never going to. Okay, so how do we How do we reboot this machine and try to get it back on track, actually producing the kind of transformation that should be getting produced? So when you think of somebody who is agentic, and that means they have agency to accomplish something, you might think of somebody in the world, for example, like Bill Gates, okay, or Steve Jobs. And the reason I say those two people, because they're pretty well known, and I think that probably 100% of you who are watching this video are doing so with the help of those two people. Right now, I have some computer screens in front of me, and they're created by Apple. So Steve Jobs helped create this. It's agentic. Something that's in... I have an iPhone right here. Some of you are probably watching on your Android or iPhone, watching this video on that, which means, okay, so... And then, so between Google, Microsoft, and Apple, you have a great amount of agency in the starting of these businesses that has affected everybody and affected the procedurally. How do we procedurally exchange information now? And I'm not touting these guys as great Christians or anything like that. Of course not. Okay. Of course, there's great things to disagree with by far with each of these guys, but think about the agency that they have. What if you could have some Bill Gates level agency as a Christian? What would that look like? And I presume that when I say that, some of your minds automatically jump to like the Great Awakening. Look at all the good that was done there. And I have to tell you, I don't think a lot of good was done there. I think you have a commonly shared mythopoetic narrative framework among a whole bunch of people who think certain things about the Bible, and then a bunch of people come along and put them into a guilt trip and dangle them over a hill emotionally. And then you persuade them to willfully assert certain creedal propositions as a result. Now, what did that do? Did that produce any transformed individuals? Maybe some things happen in society. I mean, I've heard stories about brothels closing down and bars closing down. But on the other hand, you have this priggish, puritanical, unscriptural viewpoint of things also sneaking in, causing people to do virtue signaling and judge people in very harsh ways. I mean, some bad things came as a result as well. So it depends on what metrics you use. Are things getting better or are things getting worse? And if you talk to most Christians, that you will have this presumptive statement that most things are getting worse all the time. And then you look elsewhere, maybe you look at Steven Pinker's work or something like that, and you say, well, depends on what metrics you look at, because by some metrics, income, food, clothing, relative poverty, all this kind of stuff, we're making progress in all of these areas, as you know, globally, and certainly in Western societies, so forth and so on. So it depends on what information you look at and where you get the information. So what constitutes better? Are we talking about morally better? Are we talking about physical sustenance better? What are we talking about? And if things are better, what role did Christians or Christianity play in making them better? If things are getting worse, why isn't the presence of Christianity stopping them from getting worse? Those are some of the questions I want to ask. So I kind of see if I feel kind of a little bit jaded, a little bit upset, because the idea of turning into a transformed person has never been presented in a non-virtue signaling kind of way to me in the 4 decades of my life until just recently. Okay. And I'm like, man, if I could just have had this when I was younger, if I could just have known about this way when I was younger. And I know I've heard Romans 12:2 a million times. I memorized it when I was a kid, and you say it. But then for someone to come out and to have it hashed out in a way that actually produces the transformation in a first-hand experiential, fideistic, subjective, participatory kind of way, which is mind-alteringly enlightening. That is not something that I even knew about before, just recently. And when I say recently, I'm talking within 2.5 years. Why is that? How can we change that? How can we get this kind of mindset to people when they are younger? And there are more videos that are going to follow where I want to talk about some of this stuff. If you think about the effectiveness of Bill Gates, the agency of Bill Gates, okay? Effective to do what, right? So you might not agree with the things that he's done, but if you look at both Microsoft and stuff that he's done after Microsoft, and I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about actually killing, just set that aside for a second. I don't want to that's not the point, all right? I'm just trying to find a famous person with a lot of agency to talk about that isn't so politically divisive as the president, all right? So if you were to take, say, Mother Teresa, okay, and I know a lot of my Baptist background people will say, she's a Catholic who claimed to die with darkness in her heart and stuff like that. But I think we could all agree that what she was trying to do was a good thing. She's out there trying to be selfless, trying to help people. I think we can agree at least on that, whether or not you agree with her beliefs or the modality of what she was doing. And then you look at somebody like Bill Gates. And I hate to say this, but as a non-Christian, if the numbers are right, Bill Gates has helped way more people than Mother Teresa ever could. Which brings into the issue, physically, which brings up the issue of scalability. So if you are trying to do the right thing, but you can only affect a little bit at a time, perhaps you should work on your mind a little bit so that you could be more scalable. You say, Kevin, what's scalable? Okay, scalability is the ability to mass produce a good thing so that there's a lot of them, okay? Like the Microsoft operating system, and regardless of your opinion of it, you can make millions of copies of it, and you can put it on a whole bunch of devices, which provides functionality to a lot of hardware. If you're a nurse, you are doing a great thing. You're helping people, but you're helping people by yourself, one person at a time. And there's only so much you can do one person at a time. You're very limited just by the amount of days you're going to be alive to how many people you can effectively help if you're a nurse, okay? But if you're a software developer, you can make software one time. It's scalable. You can make 1 million copies, and then if it's a great, wonderful, life-changing thing, you can change lives of millions of people, all right? If you're a hardware developer even too. So I'm not putting down... So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a nurse. Certainly not. Absolutely, they're known as God's angels. And so certainly that is a very noble profession, but at the same time, if I'm just using this as an example of if you are trying to transform into somebody that has as much agency as possible, or if you want to transform into a person who can recognize somebody that has agency to whom you can contribute your effort to, bolster what it is that they're doing. That's how you should commit your mind to. If Mother Teresa had Bill Gates' mind for scalability of help, what could she have done differently? All right, think about that. Things to think about. I'm going to break these down into heart, mind, and will. Heart, and these are just brainstorming. I'm just brainstorming here. So the heart is basically like your desire to bring about what ought to be, okay? Like science can tell you what is, but it can't tell you what ought. That's where morality and ethics comes in. That's where sense-making comes in. That's where you have to decide. I encourage you to look into Moral Foundations Theory by Jonathan Haidt. If you're looking at it from a biblical perspective, you have a divine ethic. All right, that divine ethic is a subcategory of 6 overarching categories of where and why people make moral decisions that they make. So I'd ask you to look into that. Desire your heart. If your heart is in the right place, you desire that which is good for the whole, like all the people you can, without benefiting the self at the expense of others. So there's nothing wrong with benefiting yourself, but you wouldn't want to benefit yourself at the expense of others. Like you don't want to steal somebody else's shoes so that you have them and they don't. It's not something like that. a good heart would desire to obtain progress without externalizing harm to the commons. For example, you may have a factory that's building wonderful things, but if you're dumping toxic waste into the river, now nobody can drink it and the fish are dying. You don't want to do that. Now that's physical things, but sometimes what we do is we make progress with our paradigms, our thought paradigms, and even within Christianity, with all the different paradigms to which people become ideologically possessed within the Christian framework, people they introduce pollution into the information ecology. So, of all the true things that are floating around in the Christian memeplex, there is a lot of pollution floating around in there too, and you have to sort through that in order to discern what's true. And there are a lot of factors causing you to sort incorrectly, causing you to select for things that are in fact not true, like recommendations and respect for older, wiser, Christians that you think are older and wiser that have influence over you, or when people speak in a way that stirs up your emotions that cause you to select for things that aren't in fact true, or when people use Russell conjugations to frame things in such a way that cause you to select for something as being true when in fact you were just manipulated and your feelings were leading you more than you realize. You think you're empirically assessing the facts and the data, but really you have been biased, you've been manipulated. Promoting a paradigm that you didn't originate and hash out yourself is 100% for sure introducing pollution into the information ecology. Okay. One of your goals should be to try to that is externalizing harm to the commons of all the Christian datum floating around out there. Okay. Whenever you open your mouth and make willful assertion of creedal propositions and put them out there, you are contributing to the junk and the garbage that people have to sort through as they're trying to find what the truth is. And then that also determines how serious they are about trying to find the truth. So you want to desire to obtain progress without externalizing harm to the commons, and that would be both informationally and physically. And then you'd want to desire what is best for the sustainable prosperity of future generations. And I know the sustainability thing is a big thing with green, and I'm not into that. I believe in having a clean environment, but I think there are ulterior motives associated with the people who are all green, that they're really about control. They're not really about helping anything. So that's not what I'm trying to talk about. But what I'm trying to talk about, for example, sustainable prosperity of future generations. If you want to pass the Christian faith down to future people, you cannot just pass down the statement of faith and get them to learn it and memorize it and store it in their brain and, forcibly persuade others to keep, willfully asserting these propositions. That what you need to do is teach them how to generate those propositions. And then furthermore, you actually would not want them to stop at proposition generation. You would want them to be able to have meta-perspectival awareness where you can know how to generate propositions but not hold them to a higher level of certainty than they are warranted. Okay? And so that sort of thing. In other words, it's the difference between when we used to sing as a family when our family was younger, and my daughter, who was 6 at the time, she could read, but she couldn't read fast enough to read the words of the sheet music as we're going. And so she would memorize the words. Well, she can give the illusion of reading like the rest of us are, but she had memorized them. So you can memorize the statement of faith and then generate a whole bunch of post hoc rationalizations to bolster those and justify the statements in the statement of faith, but you could not produce the statement of faith yourself. Now, that's what you want to get to. You want to get to the point where you can produce it yourself. That's the procedural knowledge that we need to instill in the next generation. Not just pass down the things they're supposed to believe, but pass down the procedural knowledge of how those things were arrived at in the first place so that they can be replicated. So as you study your Bible, you should be able to wipe your mind clean of all the things that you think you believe, re-engage, and then apply sound sense making and arrive at the same conclusion again. You should not have to remember all the things that you're supposed to believe. You should be able to re-examine the available information and arrive at the correct conclusions anyway. And that is a procedural knowledge. It's like reading. You want to be able to read words in front of you, not just, memorize the eye chart. You actually want to read them. And when you first start off, like a 4 or 5 year old first starting to read, it's tedious and painful to sit there and listen to them try to sound the words out. But then you gain fluency the more you do it. Just like that, biblical interpretation should not be something that you do once and arrive at the conclusion. It should be something that you gain fluency in. So I don't need to memorize like we're going through Acts 2 in the Full Stature Initiative right now. I don't need to memorize all the proper interpretations of Acts 2. I just need to know how to interpret Scripture, and I can go through it fresh each time, live, on the fly. And the more, when you first start off, it's going to be like a 4 or 5 year old trying to read, but then you get better at it. You get more fluent at it. And you're not pre-committed to propositions that this passage is supposed to mean before you start engaging it. You're genuinely open-minded, and you apply first principles thinking to see afresh what it is saying. That's the level of, that's what we need to be passing down. That's what we need to gain that procedural knowledge, and we need to be able to pass that down to other people. And then if your heart is in the right place, you should be earnest and sincere and charitable. Okay, your mind would be your ability to be effective. Okay, and if your mind, the more prepared your mind is, the more effective you could be, is the idea behind that. So obviously you have learning in your memory. You can learn propositions, right? But then there's more than that. You have to understand that propositions are data compression. They are essentially a reduction of all the knowledge that has been gained through participatory, perspectival, and procedural knowing. So you have to be able to re-expand the propositional knowing back out into the other 3 kinds of knowing and explore new information in the other 3 kinds of knowing. And then when you propositionalize it, you have to understand that you are compressing it at the same time. And because we are human and fallible, never commit to the compression of knowledge to propositions in a certain way, because they may be articulated incorrectly in a way that you haven't identified. And they could be low resolution. And they, by definition, are almost always low resolution. One of the reasons the Bible is a narrative format is because a narrative, instead of just giving you a list of facts, a narrative is a way that you can compress the other 3 kinds of knowing without losing any data. That's why stories are so popular. That's why stories are inexhaustible and sacred, because you can continually extract value from them. They're inexhaustible. They say a picture's worth 1,000 words. Why? Because words are data compression. And it takes a lot of compressed words. It takes a lot of words to even come close. And we've been over that in some of our other videos. So you need to be going back and forth between the 4 kinds of knowing, not just locked into one, which is where Christianity is now. Right now, Christianity, you can listen to someone like James White talk about Calvinism and ridicule latent flowers and that kind of stuff, and you can tell that he is locked into propositional knowing at the expense of the other. It's all, once you understand the 4 kinds of knowing, it's all over everything that he says. And that's the problem. So the problem really isn't Calvinism. The problem is only knowing one kind of knowing, and well, there's other problems too. Your mind, you want to bolster your intellect and wisdom to effect the greatest possible agency for yourself and for others. That's where love in the heart comes in, where you're helping the transformation of others as well, and you're willing to fight the fight with them to achieve that transformation regardless of how taxing that fight may be. So you're assuming responsibility in the model of Christ. And your mind, you need to be You need to work to achieve the mind's fullest potential. What is my mind capable of? Do you have Einstein level capacity in your mind? Okay. What if we all achieved our mind's greatest potential, or are constantly worked toward it every day? My wife and I are on this thing now where we keep hitting each other up with vocabulary words of the day, and we try to analyze them in our heads and predict the definition before we read the definition to each other. So that's been kind of fun. Then we try to work those words into our everyday conversations. So that's kind of fun. So little things like that. Try to bolster your mind in your mind's capacity. Now your will, because we're talking about heart, mind, and will. Your will is your inclination to commit to being effective, to get up off your keister and do something. Okay? Your inclination to do that. It's your inclination and eagerness to act on behalf of people and plans in a way that will result in positive transformation. I know you can't define a word with a word, but the will here is your willingness to do that, to commit yourself actively to that progress. That's what we want to see. In 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 9, "And thou, Solomon, my son, know thou the God of thy father, and serve him with a perfect heart and with a willing mind." So a perfect heart would be a heart that desires all the right things and wants to bring them to pass. A willing mind, would be someone who's willing to come in and go out, to get up and do, and apply their mind to bring something to pass, to make it happen. For the Lord searcheth all hearts and understandeth all imaginations of the thoughts. If thou seek him, he will be found of thee, but if thou forsake him, he will cast thee off forever. Imagine the greatest possible potential your mind could reach as a future self of you, say, however many years from now. And imagine that future self of you is looking down on you in assessment of how well you're doing. And that is one way to picture God, if you will, if you're striving to reach that full potential. And then you could compare yourself with that mind. How do I compare right now to the future possible mind if I were to completely commit it to betterment, to the Lord? How would that work? Philippians 4:7. "And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ." Well, we're talking about the heart, the mind, and the will. And the peace of God will keep your heart and mind through Jesus Christ. So you might have the will, presuming the will is in place. You are willing to get up and go do. The heart and mind will need to be stewarded so that the will can be effective in the right direction. So your will, you don't want it misguided and you don't want it misapplied. Okay? You want it to be doing the right things for the right reason. And the peace of God is one of the things that helps you steward those things. So I heard Daniel Schmachtenberger talk about COINTELPRO. And in the era of the 1960s, a lot of liberal activism, for a lot of different reasons. If you were to Google COINTELPRO, you'd come up probably with a lot of information about the Black Panthers and how the FBI had a program designed to cause the Black Panthers to be less effective. Well, it's not just the Black Panthers, but that's what you hear about the most because of the racial sensitivity of our society today. But this interesting comment that he said here caused me to think of Christians that are subject to to bad paradigms, ideologically possessed people. What he said was the activists were infiltrated. So forget that the activists were probably promoting things that a lot of people listening to these videos would be against, all right? Or that we would question their true motives, that kind of thing. or the way they're going about it. Those activists were infiltrated, and the postmodernism narrative was upregulated. This led people to critique power systems while not being able to do anything about it. Now, what does that mean? Postmodernism, it gets summarized in a lot of ways that doesn't necessarily accurately represent it, and I am no fan of postmodernism at all, but if we're going to critique something, we want to really critique the right thing. So you can go read Foucault and Derrida when you get a chance and look into postmodernism for yourself. But essentially, the idea is that our concept of truth is constructed and that nothing can be objectively true in a sense. And the only truth that there is really is power. So it's who's in control. There's no real objective truth. It's just who's controlling what's considered to be true. Now that redux probably doesn't do it justice either. But for the sake of this video, what you want to understand is it's kind of funny when you think about it, but there's something built into the counter narrative that cause it to be ineffective. So you have a whole bunch of people who think the government is doing something wrong and they want to stop it. Now, we have some riots have been going on in the United States recently due to God knows what, police violence, COVID, who knows. And it's easy to get somebody sufficiently motivated and outraged and angered to tear something down, to burn something, to destroy something, to break a window. It is, if you were to motivate people to do something good, such as build something, to design and build something, that would take a lot longer, and causing them, emotionally manipulating them to be outraged would not have sufficient duration to be able to last for them to build the thing or to make it through the designs or do good work while they're doing it. And so that brings up the difference between your limbic system and your prefrontal cortex. And your limbic system is your emotional center, and that can be hijacked by people through a variety of means to cause you to have the will to do something. They're willing to go out there and burn things and tear them down, but they don't have the mind to build anything up to replace it. So instead of burning something down and saying you're all wrong, you should all be burned, maybe somebody with the right mind could come up and say, this is how we should be doing things, and then create a small version of it that's actually functional that would be a strange attractor that everybody would want to do. Okay, where has this happened before? Well, the strange attractor thing, what if the government dictated that everybody carry around a device with them where they could be contacted and tracked, geolocatively tracked all the time? Nobody would go for that. But if you attract people to it, everybody will go buy one themselves. So what you would want to do is create a thing, build a thing that is so good that people would be attracted to it and they would want to replicate and do it for themselves. And that is the best way to have a cooperative society that is not based on top-down tyrannical monarchical tyranny. Might makes right, forcing everybody to do a certain thing. If you had the utopic vision that was genuinely right, you should be able to demonstrate it and then show other people how to do it rather than tear down the existing structure. It's almost like going through a house and knocking down all the walls to find out which one is load-bearing. That's not how you want to go about doing things, because then you have this in a huge structure that everyone's inhabiting. You don't want to just go knocking down walls to find out which ones are load-bearing. You want to be very careful about this, and you want to think of unintended consequences, that sort of thing. One of the things, like the prime directive of the dogma of postmodernism of these activists, was that all hierarchical organized power is bad. And that is an ingenious thing for counterintelligence to do, because if you don't want to be overthrown, you're a hierarchical structural organization, and anything in game A, what some of those guys would say that is effective, would have to be a hierarchical structural organization in order to have any agency whatsoever, in order to be agentic at all. And so the cardinal sin, the original sin of postmodernism, is hierarchical structural organization. That's the one thing you can't do. So if is if they were to gather together, if those activists were to gather together into something that had any agency that could make a difference, they would also be creating that paradigm's original sin of being a powerful hierarchical organizational structure, and therefore they would then be evil. So you had a narrative built into the system which prevented them from doing anything about what they were complaining about, because as soon as they did, the rest of the crew would reject them for the evil that they were exhibiting. So it's actually kind of genius. And it made me wonder. I wonder, and I don't know off the top of my head, but it'd be interesting to hear what some of you think. I wonder if in Christianity we are all accepting some things as part of the Christian narrative that in reality are limiting our agency from being able to be effective with the things that we think are true, with the transformation that we're trying to afford. So the next thing he says here, so he says the postmodernism narrative was upregulated. So to upregulate something, imagine a bell curve, and you have all these different ideas, and postmodernism is over here. What you want to do is move the top of the bell curve over to postmodernism. So you want it to be the most regular thing, all right, of the things that are held. And most people's sense making is essentially what they consider to be normal boils down to where they fit in that, Gaussian distribution kind of thing. So at the same time, next thing he says, social studies of genuine war and strategy were downregulated in exchange for something that would make people feel righteous while being less effective. So if there's all these topics, you have postmodernism over here, and then there's social studies of genuine war and strategy. Like, how would you actually bring, like, if you are an activist and you like to see something come to pass, you would need to learn game theory, you need to learn power theory, you need to learn how influence theory, how to gain the influence to bring your will to pass. You would need to build your mind up to where you would have to do that. So you would have to study strategy. Well, if you downregulate strategy and instead you optimize for the postmodern narrative, you have no strategy to organize and overthrow, and you have something built into the narrative which prevents them from organizing to the sufficient capacity where they can bring their will to pass. So if you have a group like that, you can essentially make them as angry as you want, and they will never be effective. Except for tearing things down, they will never be effective at building anything up. Okay? They will never bring anything good to pass. They will never bring anything good to pass. And that's a problem. So it made me wonder, that's where Christians are. They feel righteous, but let's face it, people, Christians aren't really effective at bringing anything good to pass. Oh, well, we got 30,000 people saved. And when I hear people say that, ostensibly that would be good, but those 30,000 people are probably just limbically hijacked into being persuaded to willfully assert certain creedal propositions. Are they transformed in any way? Are they actually better? Are they actually gaining procedural knowledge into what will make them a wise person that will benefit anybody else while here on earth? And I know some of you, well, if in this life only we have hope in Christ Jesus, we are of all men most miserable. So everything can't be about just the afterlife. It's like, and you can understand the criticism from non-Christians. It's like we have this set of propositions about metaphysical reality, which is completely untestable, and we impose them onto people, and we say, "Oh, that gets your afterlife squared away. What about this life?" And like Jesus said, if you don't believe me when I've told you of earthly things, how shall you believe me when I tell you of heavenly things? If we are claiming to have a set of truth about metaphysical reality, the afterlife and so forth, but we can't create anything attractive in this life that actually matters, not just convincing a whole bunch of people, a large quantity of people of certain creedal propositions, not just persuading people propositionally, but actually transforming people who walk in wisdom in all four kinds of knowing, who can bring great and wonderful things to pass in the societies where they take part, where everybody, that they, give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all, where everybody could recognize, wow, this person is very valuable to be here. What made him this way? And maybe commitment to genuine biblical Christianity would make a person that way, and maybe we've been doing it wrong because there aren't people like that who can distinctively attribute their success exclusively to the fact that they are following, that they believe Christian propositions. There's a lot of other synchronistic things that are also going on. So what can we do? I hope you know by now, when I ask questions like this, I'm not looking for answers. I'm trying to get you to think. I'm trying to help cultivate insight into, I am looking for answers ultimately, but I'm not looking for the answers that pop into your head out of the paradigm. The answer that pops into your head within 10 seconds of hearing me ask a question is not the answer that I'm looking for, okay? Or you already would have been doing it and we would have heard of you by now, okay? So that's not what I'm looking for. But we're looking for something that is bigger and better. I have a feeling that if we are successful and we do something, for example, with something like the Full Stature Initiative, and people do start to become more wise, that you and I will perhaps be the start of something that maybe 5 or 6 generations from now will be a wonderful, transformative, positive thing on the face of planet Earth. I really think that's possible. And I invite you to fully invest your heart, mind, and will in bringing that transformation to pass, both in yourself and in other people, and be willing to think outside the box when we're thinking of ways, the procedural knowledge of how to do this and how to pass down the how to do this, while cultivating insight and not stultifying the creativity that will shed light on how this should be done in the future, which will probably come from people generations after us. And maybe our job will only be to create the freedom away from the shackles of propositional tyranny that will allow the next generation to pursue all four kinds of knowing and take us in the right direction. Maybe we can do something like that. That's kind of what I'm hoping. I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you. And good day.